Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1986. So, what we're going to do in this video is another car build, as we've already done the engine build for this model. That's going to be the Edison Star, bringing it up to 1986. As we can see, we don't have that version yet. So far, the only model we have is the Edison Luna, which we did in the last video. So let's go ahead and start things up. Now, it's been a little while for me since I did my engine build, so I don't have a very strong recollection of what I did. I mean, I know roughly what I did, but I'm probably going to end up looking at the engines here a little bit just to make sure I know what kind of power we're looking at. All right, so we're in 1986. What body we're going to use is kind of a good question. The body I had been using, I'm really not a big fan of, as it has a tendency. Well, it's heavier than a lot of the other models, based off of its wheelbase size. It's very front heavy, which is pretty problematic. I might see if there is other variants of, bodies we can use here, because this is the body I was using, this 104.3 inch wheelbase, and since I've been using it, it has been kind of frustrating as it's very problematic. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we've got otherwise. So we're starting to get into older models here, so we're looking at kind of 70s era down here. So we don't want that. Let's see what one of these newer bodies is like. So we've got a 101-inch wheelbase. Okay, there's no variant of that, so we won't be selecting that. I don't want a hatchback. This looks like some kind of sports car, kind of. Lower-end sports car, maybe. There might be a body we use in the future. We've got kind of like a Miata-esque body. Don't really know if there's anything we can choose as an alternative, so we might be stuck with that. Because it seems like all of our options are very limited in what their variants are. And most of them look like they're mostly like performance-oriented cars. So, looks like we're stuck with the old model that we've been using, because it's the only sedan of like a mid-size sedan, which is what the Star is. So it looks like we're going to be choosing this sedan, as much as I'm not a fan of it. And I believe this is the car that we built the Luna out of. So there we go. There's our rundown. So let's go ahead and choose our four-door sedan. Go over the chassis things. And I might try a front-wheel drive setup for this, but as I discussed in the last video, due to the way that they model the gearboxes, it's almost impossible to get a reasonably sized engine in a transverse mount at all. But we'll go ahead and we'll try it. So front transverse, because as front heavy as this car is, it would actually benefit quite a bit from that front-wheel drive, but I don't think we'll get it. I'm going to do semi-trailing arm, even though normally a detorsion beam, mostly because I don't expect this to actually fit. Go ahead and do steel body panel, and just go ahead and skip ahead. I'm not going to do fixtures or anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and load in the engine now, and we'll see how that does. Now, it might cause some little bit of issues that might kick us out, but no big deal if that happens. So let's go ahead. Now, we're going to be using the L13586 variant as our base engine, so let's see if that fits. Okay, it appears that it does. So it looks like, if we look at this, oh boy, it barely fits in there. And this is what I'm talking about here. Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, this is shouldn't fit. Because if you look here, the gearbox is almost literally touching my my tire there. This is not the right gearbox setup for a transverse mounted engine at all. I mean, this is what you'd have in a longitudinal setup. As you can see, the gearbox itself looks like it's longer than my actual engine. So it kind of defeats the purpose, especially when you have the engine that far over to the right side of the car. And also we have the engine just clipping through the body really badly. We're going to take this if it allows it. But as you can see there, it's very, very minimally fitting. Now, the question we have, though, is will the V6 fit? And we want the BS, if we can find it in this list, which you can't sort at the moment, so sometimes it's a little challenging. Okay, that appears to fit. We would just want the 3.0 version. Let's see how this fits in the body. All right, as I thought, it's a lot shorter, which is one of the reasons why V6s kind of became the thing. Because with the transverse mount, you're not going to be able to fit an i6 in a lot of cars. It's pretty much the only kind of vehicle you're going to usually be able to fit an i6 with a transverse mount is going to be a pickup truck because they're usually, big enough and wide enough to accommodate such a thing. Most every other type of car, the i6 is going to just be too long. So that's why, V6s became the thing, is because of that. Because, it really well suits a transverse mounting. But as we can see, it clips through the body here pretty hard. But it looks like it's going to accept both engines. Now, whether or not that's a bug, I don't know. I've had issues before where the car will tell me that it will take the engine, but then I do the body modifications, styling and what have you. And then all of a sudden it decides that it doesn't fit anymore. So we'll have to see how this works. But as you can see, the problem here with the gearbox is pretty major. And this is only a 2.4 liter inline four. I mean, this isn't a huge engine. But what we have is, as far as an engine bay, this should easily fit in there. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and do the styling off camera, and we'll be back in a few. And we're back. So as far as the color goes, again, I'm going with that duller kind of plasticky look in this era. Now, traditionally, I think the mid-range car in our Edison lineup has been some shade of blue, so I went with that kind of blue. I don't know if I've been consistent with that, but coming back to that now, pretty plain as far as the exterior goes. Went with that little bit more blocky look. Although I probably could achieve that a little bit better. Let's play with the hood here. I didn't do too much with the hood here. Let's see if we can bring that up a little bit. Make it a little bit more squared off. And we'll have to play with the fixtures maybe. Oh, no, actually that didn't do anything to the fixtures. So let's go ahead and make sure that carries over with our other trims here. Or the current trim, actually. Makes it a little bit more squared off. As I said, pretty plain look. So I like this kind of squarish grille style in this era with your more square headlights there with the indicators underneath. And then a very plain look in the back as well. So, again, this is a very plain, very blocky kind of, a lot of the cars from this era just kind of had this look to them. You couldn't really distinguish them. I mean, you have that even today. I mean, you have car models and you look at them and if you didn't see the badge, you'd go, I don't even know which car that is because it looks just like every other car out on the road. But that's kind of what we're going for anyway. All right, so let's go ahead and pop in and look at this engine. And just so we can see what kind of numbers we're looking at. So we're looking about 95 horsepower and 115 foot-pounds of torque. So not a whole lot of power gain over the 2.2 liter variant, but a little bit. About 10 foot-pounds of torque and about 5 horsepower, if I remember correctly, a little bit more than that. So let's pop into our trim. Hopefully, crossing our fingers, everything works. Okay, it didn't give me any glitches, and the engine's still in there. So as much as it doesn't look like it should fit, okay. So now the gearbox looks very different, and it changed where it was. So apparently, I don't know. Maybe it's because I didn't have some other things selected. I don't know what would have made this change, though, because when I put that engine in initially, the only thing that, I hadn't chosen the drive type yet. Okay. So it knocked off a little bit from the gearbox. So it's not quite as glitchy as it was before. And it actually fits in the body here. But the main problem is still, this gearbox is not the right kind of gearbox. And as I said, I mean, would you want an engine mounted that far off to the right? I mean, isn't that going to really mess with your, weight balance mechanics? I mean, you're going to want to put that engine as close to the center as you possibly can, right? So it's better. It's not nearly as glitchy as it was before, but that's because I hadn't chosen the drive type yet. So it was using, I guess, a marginally longer gearbox, which has mostly been the change here. But this kind of gearbox is still the wrong kind of gearbox for our transverse setup, and I still think it's a massive problem. In any case, it looks like we got our engine to fit, so that's what we really care about. So we've got, more than likely, we're going to put in and I don't know why we don't have any information here. And now it's disappeared completely. Okay, so we're just going to have to guess on some things. Oh, there it goes. I still don't have the button to select anything, though. Oh, well, hopefully it will reappear. All right, so we've got a 5-speed gearbox. That's good for our manual. As far as our tires, it looks like I'm hoping, no, it won't let us go any wider. So we're probably going to have to do something about our wheel arches in the future, but medium compound roads, steel. We're going to do solid 2-piston and drums in the rear. That's kind of the standard format. What did I do? 15-inch rims? That's probably fine for this car. We'll have to adjust that, though, probably later. Fully clad. Get rid of the wing angle. And cooling airflow, we only need as much as a little bit over what we require. So I'll usually like to go about 10 above. So roughly that's good. All right, so we're going to do 5 seats. We're going to do standard interior, standard cassette. I'm going to make power steering standard at this point and standard 80s safety. I'm going to go standard twin tube passive and do a normal preset. And that should give us all our numbers. And I have no idea what's going on here, but I'm not getting any. Maybe go back. Okay, there we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do the tweaks off camera, and we'll be back. And we're back. And we have quite a few trims to look at. I have 6 in total. So essentially I did standard versions of the 2.4 engine with both automatic and manual. And then I did a premium version, which is a variant of the automatic with premium interior, premium entertainment, and an ABS system added. You have pretty much the same dynamic with the 3.0 liter engine or 3-liter engine with an automatic, a manual, and a premium version. So right now we're looking at the standard 2.4 with the manual. And let's go ahead and look at what we have. Now, one thing I did change of, and I kind of alluded to I was going to do this, is I changed the rear suspension to torsion beam suspension rather than trailing arm. Now, that did have effects on the drivability and other stats, but drop down our weight, drop down cost, and other things, benefits that a torsion beam suspension gives you. And torsion beam is a great, especially early day setup for a front-wheel drive or, car. So, as far as the gearbox goes, we didn't have too much of a problem with the 2.4 engine as far as the spacing goes. So it's only a little bit of a reduction down from the basic, 50 setting. And we ended up getting a 0 to 62 time of 12.3 seconds. Now, one thing I tried to do with the automatic transmission was to kind of reset up the way I do things, and we'll see that when we do the automatic. But essentially, what we ended up with was a drivability of 40.4, sportiness of 10.8, comfort of 28.2, prestige of 16.5, and safety of 43.4. Now, you have to keep in mind, as per last video, there's been a lot of seeming calculation changes that have gone on. So these numbers aren't very comparable to a lot of what we've done in the past. As I said, there have been a lot of changes, and I didn't bother going back to the 1981 Edison Star and recalculating it as a comparison, so we were not going to have that comparison, unfortunately. Any case, moving along, well, I guess the one thing I want to talk about here is, in my opinion, one thing that really helped here is setting up that front-wheel drive setup for this body. With it being as front heavy as it is, it really needed that change, because with it to be rear wheel drive with a 57%, front weight bias, you don't have very much weight on those rear tires, and as a result, you don't have very good traction on them, and the wheel spin is a lot more of a problem with this body. But putting the engine in the front, being a front heavy, you have a lot of weight on those front tires. I think that helped quite a bit. But in any case, as we said, wheel spin, I was able to get down to 0%, which is good. I I think did I say the 0 to 62 time, which is 12.3 seconds, and our miles per gallon is 23.3. And that's another thing that I think has been recalculated since the last version. So keep that in mind as well, that these numbers are going to be a little bit worse than what we were seeing before. Now, for the tire setup, I ended up going with 195s, both front and rear. And I went with a little bit larger wheel diameter, and that did help drivability quite a bit. Now, it did have a detrimental effect to wheel spin, which, makes sense. Usually lower profile tires, one of the big advantages to that is you kind of reduce that, it's like a warping effect that you have with the tires. When you put it under that initial acceleration, you put a lot of torque on that rubber. When you have higher profile tires, they have a tendency to warp. With the lower profile tires, you because they're a lot more rigid and they're a lot, due to that, shorter profile or smaller profile, they're a lot more rigid, so they don't tend to warp as much. And that's kind of what we see as a reflection there. I still see glitchiness with this tire width and rim offset and everything set up. So I just will point that out, that I wasn't 100% sold that they fixed this. It seems like it's a little bit better, but it's still very glitchy. You oftentimes have to press the button multiple times to get it to move. You'll select one setting and it will change another setting. You click once on the rim offset and it changes it by 2. So I tried to do as minimal changes as I could with the rim offset and everything, because I was really concerned about the glitchiness of that. So just keep that in mind. Now, brakes, I went as big as they could get, and solid, disc, 2-piston, and drum brakes in the rear. I think we're seeing about the same kind of brake fade we got with the Luna. And as I said, with this new version with the pad type, having an effect on brake fade, I think the brake fade that's coming across is a lot harsher than what we've seen in the past. Honestly, I think they should probably reduce this down so that when you have neutral pad types and you're not having something that's like a super aggressive setup, brake fade shouldn't really be that bad, but that's just my opinion. Just like with wheel spin, I think wheel spin is far too more aggressive than it should be. But again, that's my opinion. I mean, when you have a 95 horsepower engine and it has problems with wheel spin, that seems a little bit wrong to me. But that's just, again, my opinion. You've already seen the aerodynamic setup that I did, but, just to show this again, so you can see the, drag and other things if you want to. Again, you've already seen my setup here. Now, with the suspension, again, I usually go with the normal preset, and the reason I do that is because I usually think that's a great ground, baseline to work with whenever you're doing like a standard style setup. Even when you're not, oftentimes it's a good point to build off of. But in any case, I ended up stiffening the springs in the rear as well as the damper stiffness, and I think I also increased the sway bar stiffness in the rear as well, as the normal preset was very soft in the rear, both with the spring stiffness and the sway bar stiffness. I think a little too soft, so I did a little bit changes there. Ride height, I increased a little bit, but not by much. And that's pretty much it for the changes here. So let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. So we've got drivability, sportiness, we've got comfort, prestige, and finally safety. And as per usual, if you guys want to look at these numbers in detail, go ahead and pause at any point. When I'm going through this, I like to give you guys a few seconds so that you get that opportunity to pause. In any case, let's go ahead and go to our test track. So our top speed comes in at 107.5 miles an hour. Our weight is 2,517 pounds, which is actually not bad for this body, if I remember correctly. Now, that weight distribution, as I said, very front heavy with this body, 59% in the front there. That's very front heavy. Now, with a front-wheel drive car, you're going to expect that dynamic to be a little bit, more than you'd see in a rear-wheel drive car, because all of the driving elements of the drivetrain itself is all in the front. So you're going to have all that weight. So, with a rear-wheel drive, I mean, you're still going to have the engine and the gearbox in the front, but you're going to have your drive, what's the word I want? I want to say drive line, but I don't think that's the right word. Drive shaft. That's it. you have your drive shaft going back, you have your axle, all of that stuff in the rear kind of adds weight that you're not going to have in a front-wheel drive setup. And I think that torsion beam probably is going to make that even worse because torsion beam suspension is pretty minimalistic. So that probably reduces weight quite a bit in the rear. Any case, our cornering Gs, they're all right with your 20-meter cornering, but your 250-meter cornering, not so much. Speeds don't seem like that great. So cornering G's, a little bit, maybe not that impressive. Acceleration, 12.3 seconds is kind of pokey. I think that's pretty much all we're going to look at. So I don't know if this is going to beat the 1 minute 50 time I always kind of set to do, but we'll see. Okay, it looked like it did, but barely. We beat it by about a half a second. So not too bad. It actually, in my opinion, did pretty well. Let's go ahead and switch to our next car, which is going to be the automatic version. And as I said earlier when I was talking about the gearbox, I tried to set up my gearboxes a little bit differently this time. I've been thinking about it, and I was thinking that with the 4-speed transmission, I was probably setting things up a little bit probably not the way I should have been. I was setting up the 4th gear to be an entirely economy gear, and honestly, that's probably not the way a 4-speed transmission should be set up. So I kind of only did it like kind of a little bit 50-50 with that 4th gear. It's a little bit beyond that top speed, but not a ton. So it's a little bit in economy, but the main thing we're trying to get is at 0 to 62 time a little bit closer to what we're getting with our manual transmissions. Also, I didn't like the dynamic that the fact the automatic transmissions, well, not only being very slow, had a lot more or better economy than our manual transmissions, which honestly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think a lot of that was me setting up the transmission a little bit wrong. But you have to also consider when you have that 4-speed transmission and you're trying to drop down your top speed and not make it so much an economy gear, you're really going to start having to contend with wheel spin. Now, we're not seeing it that much of a problem with this 2.4-liter engine, but I did end up having to drop off the spacing a little bit. We're seeing a lot more drivability here, and we do see our direct comparison here. So 44.4 for our drivability, so about 4 points there. Sportiness goes down to 4.5. That's kind of the dynamic of an automatic transmission, so that's not too surprising. Comfort goes up by a couple points. Prestige drops a little bit. I'm going to assume that's top speed predominantly there. And safety goes down a little bit, and I think that's going to be a difference in weight. And it looks like production unit-wise, it costs a little bit more time to make it. All right. Again, our tire setup is going to be pretty much the same for all these trims, so you're not going to expect a change here. But just to go ahead and show okay, is that not, okay, I'm going to have to probably calculate this thing and then come back because it wasn't showing the graphs right. There we go. That's better. So we can see this graph, and then we'll move on here. So we see, kind of a more understeery behavior for this car, but it's front-wheel drive and very front-heavy, so that's not too surprising. As far as I said, your wheel setup's pretty much exactly the same with the other trims, and you're not going to see much of a change here, nor are you going to see much of a change in the brakes. Now, we have a little bit less brake fade, and I think that's due to less weight than what we had with our manual transmission. The way that this game works is it purely works off of how many gears your transmission works. It has no bearing on what type of transmission it is. So if you have a 4-speed automatic and a 4-speed manual, they weigh exactly the same. Which, again, I don't agree with. I also don't agree that they would cost the same either. But, again, that's my opinion. Take it as it is. Moving along, cooling airflow is going to be the same. I'm going to have to make sure that the V6s have different cooling airflow. I'm pretty sure I set them up correctly, but we're going to have to just double-check that. Interior's the same. Now, with the suspension, again, it's going to be the same. There's not going to really be any changes because we didn't change the engine. So I didn't really see, there's a little bit of difference in weight, but not enough that I felt like changing the suspension up. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. And again, pause it if you want to look at this in any detail. So drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally, safety. Okay, let's look at the test track. So we dropped down a little bit in top speed. That's kind of to, expected, considering how I set up the gearbox. But because I didn't set up the gearbox as, wimpy as I have in the past, I think the top speed hasn't suffered as much. So 103.1 miles an hour from 107 point whatever. Not too big of a drop off. We see our weight distribution goes down a little bit because that gearbox is a little less weight. So that, we have a little less front heavy. Cornering G's are exactly the same. We're having a less acceleration time. So I don't expect this is going to beat our 1 minute 50 time. Let's go ahead and run it. And just to save time, I'm just going to jump to it here. So we see our direct comparison here. So we gained, more than I would say. I mean, we're looking at 1.4-ish seconds that we added on there. So a decent amount slower there. Okay, as far as the premium trim, you're just going to expect that it's going to be a little bit heavier, but it's going to get a little bit better stats. So I wanted to briefly look at this. I'm not going to look at it in the same level of detail that I did with some of our other models, but you can see a direct comparison here in stats. So we've got drivability of 46.6 versus that 44.4, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that I put ABS system in there. Our sportiness drops, and that's mostly because of the weight. This increases in weight. We see our direct comparison and cost, so a lot more cost, a lot more production units. Our 0 to 62 time drops down, so you're going to expect this is going to be even slower. But just, you get your direct comparison there. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the 3 liter versions here. So we've got our standard 3.0 M, and I'm going to go ahead and show the engine so we can see what kind of power we're expecting out of this thing. So we're getting 131 horsepower and 154 foot-pounds of torque. So it's a pretty big jump. I mean, we're getting almost 40 foot-pounds of torque more and about 15 horsepower more, roughly. Now, that's not a lot of power, honestly, like, horsepower-wise, but torque might be part of the problem with what we're going to see here in the future. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about our drivability numbers. Again, we're not going to see a direct comparison here because this is going to be comparing the automatic version. So you know what? We'll go ahead and recalculate so it's going to give us the graphs that we want to see. But drivability comes in at 40.2, which I think is a slight drop off from what the manual with the 2.4 was. Sportiness comes in at 12. Comfort comes in at 29.2. Prestige comes in at 19.5. And safety at 44.2. Now, our miles per gallon comes in at 23.3. This engine actually is pretty economical, even though it is, a little bit probably heavier and things like that. But the engine itself was pretty economical just off of its base stats. So it didn't suffer too much from that increased weight. 0 to 62 time is going to be the most impressive we see yet at 10.3 seconds from this model. Again, I set this gearbox up to get rid of that wheel spin. And we see the direct results of that. So top speed went up, and that makes sense. We have more power to work with. But you notice how much I had to drop the spacing to contend with that wheel spin. And, it's quite a bit. I mean, our first gear is almost going, it's going beyond 50 miles an hour here. And that's kind of one of the things that I say, the wheel spin I think is a little bit too aggressive. I know we gained, 40 foot-pounds of torque there, but that's really, I honestly think that's a little bit going overboard. The fact that I had to change the spacing in the gearbox this much for, that much of a change, it just seems not that realistic to me, honestly. I really think that wheel spin's a little bit too harsh. Okay, moving along, I have the same tire setup, and now again, I could have gone down with wheel diameter, and that would have improved wheel spin. But watch my drivability numbers here. Yeah, you see them plummet there? Drop down a full point there. So, not so sure I'm a big fan of that. I mean, that big of a penalty. I will also point out that when I initially set up this engine with the same kind of spacing, I think it had over 20% wheel spin. That difference dropped down the drivability by a full 4 points. So, very big penalty for that wheel spin. So, I just want to point out that, if we're going off of these numbers, you want to get rid of that wheel spin because it does penalize you very heavily for it being there. Okay, so moving along, let's do our aerodynamics. I'm pretty sure I set the cooling airflow correctly. It does appear that I have. I'm pretty sure we're going to see the same dynamic with all of our other variants with the 3-liter engine or trims with the 3-liter engine. But in any case, moving along, in case you wanted to look at the drag and everything. Again, interior setup's going to be exactly the same, so not a whole lot of changes here. As far as the suspension goes, I went with the normal preset again, and then I did some stiffening of the dampers, and again, the rear springs and the rear sway bar were a little bit too soft, so I stiffened those up. And the ride height went up a little bit from that the normal preset, but I think it's a little bit lower than it was with our standard 2.4. So let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats here. So we have drivability, we have sportiness, we have comfort, prestige, and finally safety. Okay, let's look at our test track. All right, so top speed obviously increased quite a bit there, 119.4 miles an hour. Our weight distribution is even more front heavy now. We're talking about 61.4% in that front, which is a real front heavy. The cornering G's look like they are a little bit worse, but definitely our 0 to 62 time is a lot better. So I'm going to expect definitely a quicker time here. And just for, brevity's sake, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead here. So we got 1 minute 44.99, which is obviously a pretty big improvement here. I mean, with the 2.4, we were talking 149.5-ish, roughly speaking. So we're getting 145 versus 149.5. So, that's a pretty big improvement there. So let's go ahead and jump into our automatic version here and see how we set up the gearbox and everything. So let's go ahead and go to our trim. And we have, again, I'm going to have to recalculate so the graphs work all right. All right, so we have a direct comparison here. So we gained, quite a bit in drivability, lost in sportiness, gained in comfort, lost in prestige, that's probably top speed there, and safety went down a little bit, and that's probably reduction in weight. So again, I went with the same kind of idea with the automatic transmission set up for our 2.4, so not quite as as much of an economy gear for our fourth gear. So the top speeds dropped down quite a bit. We have our 0 to 62 time, though, is a little bit more reasonable at 11.2, and that is quicker than our 2.4 liter variant. So that is, in my opinion, is a plus. But we see again with the dynamics here with the spacing, I was able to get a little bit more aggressive than our manual transmission, but not by much. Again, you have that wheel diameter set up exactly the same. We have brakes set up pretty much the same. I didn't mention the brake fade's worse on this model, which makes sense. It's, a little bit heavier and everything, and there's more power going through it. So there's more demands on those brakes. Cooling airflow, again, there you go. There's your graphs. This is pretty much the same, and this is going to be exactly the same as it was with our manual transmission variant. So let's look at our detailed stats. So we've got drivability. We've got sportiness. We've got comfort and prestige, and then finally safety. So now let's go ahead and look at our test track. So our top speed dropped down, but it's still pretty good, 114.8 miles an hour. Weight distribution looks like it's a little bit better. I think the cornering G's are about the same. So let's go ahead and run this. We're going to expect this to be quicker than the 1 minute 50 time for sure. It's probably going to fall in between the two, the manual 2.4 and the manual 3.0. I would say probably somewhere in the middle there. So let's go ahead and run this. And it pretty much did. So 1 minute, 46.87. So again, about 2 seconds on there to the time, but it's still, roughly 2-ish seconds quicker than the, 2.5-ish seconds quicker than the manual 2.4. So there you go. I could show you the premium trim, and but mostly that would be just a comparison with the stats, and we're going to see that in a bit anyway. So let's go ahead and close out here. But before I do that, I just want to make sure it saves. We do have still sometimes bugs with saving, which they supposedly fixed, but let's go ahead and look at our comparison here. So Let's sort it by year so we can find our versions. I'll probably compare it with the 86 Luna. As I said, 81 star is probably not a good comparison point because we didn't recalculate those stats, and they're probably going to be inflated as a result. I mean, let's just look at it really briefly. I mean, you see how much higher the drivability numbers are, and we're not going to be able to achieve that due to that recalculation that I talked about. All right, so in any case, looking across the board here for just the star, I mean, if you want to make your comparisons with the Luna, you can go ahead and eye that, but mostly the Luna is going to be, better drivability, but probably not performing the same standards as the star in, sporiness and comfort. I would imagine that we're going to have an edge there, but maybe not. As a matter of fact, it doesn't look like the Luna did too bad as far as comfort, so maybe I'm wrong there. But in any case, looking at our numbers, they kind of fall how you would expect. You have your standard trim being the least drivability, then your automatic, then your premium. And we have that same dynamic with the 3-liter engine. So, it goes in that order. It looks like we don't have that much of a difference from the two manual versions. Where we mainly gain here is sporiness here. So drivability, not that big of a difference in any of the trims. So we're looking at, 0.2 here, 0.1 with the automatic, and 0.2 with the premium. So again, only slight differences in drivability, but sporiness is where we see the main difference. We've got a lot more sporiness out of that V6, which makes sense. Comfort, it looks like, interestingly enough, the V6 got better comfort, which is actually what I wouldn't have expected. Usually speaking, the smaller engines do better, as we see here with the Luna. The smaller engine does better than the larger engine. Not the case here. That's kind of interesting to see. Prestige, I would imagine that the V6 gains out there, and it looks like it does. Although, yeah, that looks like it does. This is kind of a weird order. Unfortunately, I can't order the trims, so that's kind of inconvenient. Any case, moving on with safety, I think this pretty much goes in order of weight. So, V6 version is heavier, so there you go. And you're going to go in order of weight. You're going to have your manual is a little bit heavier than your automatic, which we see here. And then the premium trim is the heaviest because of all the premium interior and entertainment and stuff. So that makes sense. Reliability wise, we're going to have that go in order. So manual, automatic, then your premium, which again makes perfect sense. Economy speaking, again, as I said, the V6 engine is not that bad as far as economy goes. So if you do a direct comparison here, so your 2.4 manual versus our manual with the 3-liter, they're exactly the same. So that's good. It looks like our automatics achieve exactly the same. It's still slightly better, which again is not the way it would be in reality, but that's the way it turns out in the game. And again, I think I'm going to, put a lot of that down to the wheel spin just being a little bit too harsh. If it wasn't so harsh, I'd probably be able to set up that automatic transmission to be a little bit more realistic setup, but unfortunately I can't. So there you go. And, it looks like our premium trims are exactly the same. So pretty much across the board here, our V6 does exactly the same as our inline 4 as far as economy speaks. So that's interesting to see. I'm going to assume that the cost, though, is where we're going to have a main divergence here, and it looks like it is. So production unit-wise, the V6 engine takes quite a bit more time to produce, as we see there. I mean, it's pretty much a difference of 7.5 there that I'm seeing. So that's quite a big increase there. And also, as far as cost goes, now it's not a big difference as far as cost, but the main difference is production unit time. It takes a lot more time to produce that V6 than it does the inline 4. And mostly, we just see a difference of it's less than 20 in cost, and it looks like that is pretty much across the board. So we've got roughly a 14 cost here between the two automatic versions, and again, maybe about 15 or 14. Yeah, I'd say about 14 is the difference in cost. So that's about it. So pretty good performer. That V6 is a pretty fantastic engine. Now, whether or not that's performing realistically, I'm not sure. It seems like the V engines have a tendency to outperform the inline engines quite a bit. As I was noticing with the V8s, with earlier builds of the game that it was a lot easier to get, nice performing, engines as far as the economy numbers. I mean, they were dramatically usually higher than the two inline engines. So I don't know if they are trying to simulate there the efficiency of a V style engine, and that's the reason why it gets a little bit better economy. But that seems like it is the case. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.